Hello, everyone. This is Political Chit Chat, and I'm your host, Gonzalo Duran. Today's honored guest is Isaiah Vega. He is with the Bronx Conservative Party, district leader for the 54th Assembly District, and political consultant and strategist. Thank you, Isaiah, for being here today.
Thank you, Gonzalo, for having me. We've had many conversations before, but I'm honored to be on this one.
Yes. Well, now that we're transitioning from the other show to more political now we can get some nitty gritty stuff out the way.
Mm-hmm.
So for those that may not know who you are, please let them know.
So I am a district leader for the 54th Assembly District, a former candidate for the City Council in the 37th Council District, which is Cypress Hills and Brooklyn. I operate out of there, but I'm also involved in many races across the 5 boroughs. Thus, they gave me the name Mr. Tentacles.
There you go. Now, interesting, you're a part of the Conservative Party of New York,
Yes.
Particularly the Bronx borough.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of people don't know about the Conservative Party. Would you mind throwing some information?
The Conservative Party is one of 2 minor parties in New York, the other being the Working Families Party. We advocate for conservative values and principles that often may not be seen in the Republican Party. And not only that, we not only cross-endorse with the Republican Party, but we also endorse conservative Democrats as well. So, we are a party of unity. We are the party of Donald J. Trump, and we're the party of, people that may not have a political home in, the state of New York.
And, every borough has their own little niche and stuff like that as well.
Of course.
So what would you say Brooklyn is known for?
Well, Brooklyn is known for having the most conservative endorsed elected officials by far in all of history as of right now. We have a very strong team in South Brooklyn. We have wonderful leaders, my chairwoman friend, Bella Marone, wonderful friend of mine, and a wonderful leader who helps keep pushing us forward. And of course, we have a big dynamic group, very diverse, me being Hispanic. There's also many Asians, Black, and, of course, many different types of white, so to speak. But yes, that's just some of the key aspects of, being involved with Brooklyn.
And I'm glad you pointed out the diversity part. Now, in when people hear conservative, they just think the old white man, characteristics.
Of course.
And, in I'm sure in parts of the world, that is the case,
Mm-hmm.
because of the way the structure is. But over here in the cities, you'll see, once again, diversity in it. So thank you for bringing that up. And is there anything that you want to throw out there? Because you said you have your hands in a lot of different areas and individuals. You want to throw any of those names out there?
Well, I'm involved with many different campaigns, across Queens, Brooklyn, the Bronx, even Manhattan. And I'm very privileged, to even be involved in Staten Island. One key figure that I'd like to point out today with an upcoming special election is Frank Morano, who you may know from WABC's The Other Side of Midnight. Wonderful show, by the way. He's running for a special election, which will be occurring in, I believe, towards the end of April. He is endorsed by the Conservative Party. He is endorsed by Congresswoman Nicole Maliotakis. And Frank, if you're watching this, I would like to just say hello.
So that's a unique thing that people don't talk about too much, special elections. Mm-hmm. How did that come about? What is a special election?
Yes, so a special election is an off-term election, meaning, it's not occurring, during the primary season or the general election season. That usually happens because of a vacancy, whether it be death or it be resignation, the governor or the mayor, depending on which legislative office, this election is occurring in, has to call for a special election. So in this case, Councilman Joe Borelli, who is the minority leader of the New York City Council for the Republican Party, resigned to take a job in the private sector. Frank Morano, who was planning to run for the seat even before Borelli resigned, since he was term limited, Borelli was, he kind of gained that momentum, and right now he's one of, I believe, 4 candidates who have filed to run for the seat, and it's looking good for Frank. I would say that much, but that's what a special election is, and that's why it's occurring.
Now, that's something that the parties use to try to gain momentum and maybe a leg in at the same time. What do you think his, let's say his the pros and cons of what that campaign is going to be?
So, the pros of having a special election is that, for the Republican Party, the Conservative Party, they rely heavily on low turnout. And in this case, low turnout is normally good. But in a very safe seat, this is the South Shore, Staten Island we're talking about, where there's a lot of Republicans. The con here is that with low turnout, the Democrats can gain an edge with their candidate, who is Clifford Hagan. So, while Frank may have a lot of support right now, that support is not to be, underestimated, when it coming to the Democrat side. We have to be careful when it comes to special elections for our people or our seats, because, if the Democrats get their votes out, suddenly they have a council member for the next 8 to 10 months. So,
yeah. And if you're not in Staten Island, a majority of the other places in the other boroughs is heavily Democrat.
correct.
So once again, Staten Island, there's only, let's say, a certain section that's heavily or barely Democratic, and then the rest is strong Republican conservatives.
Right.
So that's and just to be transparent in that part. Now, is there any other locations that you want to talk about?
Well, one location in particular that I'd like to talk about is City Council District 21 and City Council District 25, which covers the Corona, East Elmhurst, and Jackson Heights area. Last year in the race of Donald Trump, we saw a lot of Republican momentum that has never been seen within those communities before. You look at past elections, a Republican maybe got about 20, maybe at most 30%. Donald Trump achieved 42% in those areas. And this year we have 2 conservative candidates in both those districts that I look forward to working with and helping get elected in those areas, because, they are majority Hispanic, and Hispanics have been trending a lot more rightwards. The populist message of Donald Trump has really resonated with these communities. And I feel, if not only Trump delivers on his promises, but our candidates get their message out there and promise change, I feel as though we can make really good inroads in those districts.
So now you mentioned 2 particular groups. Are those, let's say, heavily Republican conservatives, or is that more Democrat and they're trying to push it up?
So these are, historically Democratic groups. And as we've seen over the last few years, Hispanics have trended away from the Democratic Party simply because, the Democrats have abandoned them. They have abandoned, the working class message of, providing for them and, giving them the opportunities to move up. And so, with the addition of pushing progressive narratives, especially on, the more, social progressive values on abortion and the LGBT community, Hispanics have been, feeling very isolated. So while traditionally, they are Democrat voters and they are still registered Democrat, a lot of them are flipping towards becoming independent or flipping to Republican or conservative.
And flipping in not only their votes, but also in re-registering as well.
Exactly.
So, and that's, in area, I mean, we're in a battle. We're fighting for the same people. My focus, I would always say, is try to go for the ones that aren't registered or the ones that haven't voted in a very long time. What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's a very good strategy because, when you reach out to those types of people, you have to really wonder, why aren't they voting? And usually it's because no one's spoken to them. They probably never met a politician in their life. They probably watch the news all the time, and they're just like, these are people with suits in ivory towers that don't care about me. But when they see, people like you, if they see people, like our candidates, who are normal, working, class, everyday people.
Blue-collar Joes, basically.
Yeah, blue-collar Joes or blue-collar Carloses, really. Yeah. They're like, this is a guy that speaks to me. This is a guy that I can relate to because, we've been there. We've been in that same boat. And this guy, has, the courage to step up, the will to fight for, what we're fighting for, the same values. And I believe, that's really what's going to be winning races in the future from now on.
So since we have you here, let's try to pick your brain. What do you think, or that the Conservative Party can do to, let's say, increase their chances on getting somebody who's elected, to get somebody elected?
I would always like to point out, diversity. Not so much, DEI, sort of the mentality where, we just uplift anyone that's of our skin color, but uplifting high quality voices that are also minorities. And, I say this because the Democrats have uplifted people of, our skin color, but do not necessarily have the qualifications. We have a lot of veterans, we have a lot of scholars amongst our communities. And normally, these are people that, yes, we should be having, running for office, but I think the problem is, there's not enough outreach to these people, and especially in terms of our messaging, because our conservative values, fighting for the police, fighting for veterans' rights, fighting for, wanting our kids to have a quality education, it resonates with people. But the problem is people don't know that. And that's, really in terms of the outreach. If people don't know about the Conservative Party, how do you expect them to register with the Conservative Party? You may see that Republican, Democrat, Conservative, but it's like, what does being a conservative really mean? And when you talk to those people, you really, begin to understand, yes, I am a conservative.
And one of the things is the conservatives is fairly new.
Mm-hmm.
It's only it came out in the '62
Yes.
ish, and let's say the numbers. I can't speak about all the. You can speak about Brooklyn and more than I can, but I know for the Bronx, we have like maybe 3,400, give or take. Don't call me on it, guys, please. But then you compare that to the Republicans in the Bronx, that's like 500,000, and then you compare it to the Democrats, you're talking about 30 millions and up or something like that. So it's a small scale. Now, what ideas or what have you done to try to progress getting those numbers higher?
Yes. So, and not only have I run for office on the conservative line, but I've also helped candidates run for office on the conservative line. And one of the things I advocate for most is that candidates, interview with the Conservative Party, because I believe, carrying that endorsement and carrying that message will really resonate with, New York voters. I consider, the electorate in New York, even though it's majority Democrat, to be conservative minded. And, this really comes from, a lot of immigrants have living within the city and, settling their roots here. So, in terms of amplifying our message and amplifying, our numbers, I think by having candidates take on the conservative line, they can really, spread that message even further.
All right, so Mr. Tentacles, how did you outreach to all these individuals that you have?
So, part of it I think is just cold calling, and part of it is just networking with their events. Another thing I believe that we should be doing more is publicizing our events more. I know for you in the Bronx, the Bronx definitely likes to get their message out there. They like to have events all the time, but not so much, necessarily in the other boroughs. So, candidates will often, show up because, they see in a flyer or they get invited. And, usually I'll come up to them and I'll say, hey, here's how I can help you in this race. And I'll give them like a microdose of information, and then by the next thing you know, I'll be getting their card and saying, please call me. It's that simple, really.
Now, you're not a lot of people do this, but you've been behind the scenes, you've been a candidate, and now you're helping others as well. Where do you think you fit best in?
I feel I fit best in helping people. When I tried to run myself, of course, I did a lot of, work on the ground. I knocked on the doors, I got my signatures. I was out there every day, and I had my brother with me. He was about, I believe, 7 years old at the time, helping me, hand out flyers. And really, it's a lot of work. Even though I did get the money, I did get the matching funds, I still came up short. It's a hard process. It's a long road.
Well, let's not bypass that so easily right there.
Okay.
Let's say matching funds has been out for how long?
I would say since the program started since 1992.
Okay, and in that time frame, how many conservatives have made matching funds?
Well, in my district, I was the first Republican/conservative to get matching funds in that district. Notoriously hard district for Republicans and conservatives to run, but I was the first. And at that time, I believe I was 21 years old. Okay,
so 21-year-old making matching funds his first time in a district that was difficult. And then add on to, let's put it frankly, how much support were you getting?
I was getting support mainly from my neighbors, friends, family. It was very nice to have the support. But other than that, I got no endorsements from any unions, any groups, very few, if any.
So once again, with a small scale, you were able to do that. Mm-hmm. And once again, I don't want to just bypass that. Please continue with your...
Of course. Now, But before we move on, I would like to thank Lee Zeldin for endorsing me so long ago. But, going back to what we were saying, I feel it's, very important that I fit best with helping people run because, not everyone has run before. We, especially this year, have a lot of first-time candidates running, and I feel I can provide the guidance in not only fundraising, but strategy on, where to maximize door knocking, strategy on where to get the petition signatures, and, what message to focus on. Albeit it's a very broad message, for certain districts we can really isolate, what's really impacting people the most. And, and to provide one example, in the Jackson Heights, Corona Elmhurst area, there's a lot of prostitution on Roosevelt Avenue. And so, one of the things our candidates are focusing on, is that we have to stop the prostitution and, more importantly, stop the pimps from, exploiting women that come to this country from South America.
Yeah, one of the problems that people have with me is that I'm pretty hard on crime. So they're like, well, we got to think about these feelings and that feelings. Look, we have to have a certain point where we have to say, if we want things done and clean, then we have to put those things into place. There's a reason why, you're not supposed to break the law. And if we're allowing people just to do it, now we see what the outcome is.
Right.
So whose responsibility is it? Is it the people's? Is it the legislators? Is it what do you think is a problem? Like we have literally videos you have of kids being walking by these individuals doing stuff like that. I mean, how can we try to get this to be stopped?
I believe, the power rests within the legislature. We have many, soft on crime legislatures in Albany, in the city council, and, our governor and our mayor are really, bending over to these, soft on crime politicians because they feel like they're indebted to them. And so, if we do not put pressure on these legislatures, to do the right thing, then we have to vote them out. It's simple as that. And, I believe my candidates have, the messaging to really push for that. Because, this has been going on for years now, and nothing has been done. So to make effective change, you have to run for office.
And from, just in the perspective of what I think about is, let's say if you want change, you guys got to make that happen. It's your job. And if you don't think it's going well, get the person out, clean the slates, get new blood in, and then see what happens. But you have these individuals that you're working with. So let's hit on a few topics, political topics that we have here. Anything that's going on that you want to talk about?
Well, there's been a lot of talk about, the cleaning of the budget in the federal government, this Doge. And, a lot of people are sort of in an uproar in regards to that. One article I read today, was that Donald Trump and his team, fired a parks worker who had, basically was the locksmith. He had the keys to every facility, and there's a lot of uproar over this. But then, I saw a lot of comments saying, why was one person responsible for all the locks in the park? You really have to wonder. And so, I believe Doge is necessary, and I believe, Doge should be expanded to the 50 states. Where's our money going? Why is it being foolishly spent like that?
Well, would it really be needed if we weren't just wasting money?
Right.
Getting better legislators would solve that problem. Having somebody to start these things going on and hitting it hard is an eye-opener.
Right.
I mean, you have the USA Aid thing that was going on.
Yes.
Now you have, let's say, that locksmith guy. And, there's a huge uproar for the people, once again, losing their jobs. But once again, were these people even really necessary to begin with? That's debatable, until I see the numbers, the statistics, the budgets. When I was sitting in the mayor's budget meeting when they were closing out the 2024 city budget, and I heard that the mayor implemented that he wanted like a certain percentage from each department, so that they can pay for the migrants.
Mm-hmm.
Now, how did you find that percentage in every single city agency to pay for it? Like, wasn't that being used for something?
Right.
So once again, there's a lot of things that I have a problem with, and I agree with you with the one, Dodge has to be, implemented, and until there's a system of government that we're not wasting, then hey, that's what we got.
Mm-hmm.
What? Anything else?
Not that I can think of off the top of my head. I was hoping you'd provide.
Oh yeah, no problem. Look, hey, there's never something I don't want to talk about. One of the problems that I think that we have is trying to get communication to the youth. At 16, you can join a community board.
Mm-hmm.
The community boards are opening. The new registrations are opening. I think the Bronx is either February or March. Staten Island, I think, is open year round because they don't have many people that join. And then once again, every borough has their own. In the Bronx, I can't speak about the other counties, but in the Bronx, I don't know of any any registered conservatives that are in any of the boards, community boards, in all of the Bronx.
Mm-hmm.
I am not aware of one. Now, what do you feel about, let's say, the youth entering into government early?
I believe the youth should enter government early. If the youth want to see change and the youth want to be involved in change, I believe joining the community board is a good first step. And, part of that is also now, attending a community board meeting. It helps you to understand, what is going on, what, is being impacted. Parks, traffic, development, these things are very essential in understanding how our government functions. And I believe joining a community board or even attending the meetings regularly can help, the youth understand, what it is to be a part of the government.
And so for the individuals that don't know what a community board is elected individuals that don't have any, they have limited power within their community and their district on what they can, approve for. Like, I know they can do licenses for liquor and stuff like that, but when it comes to bigger projects, it's more of let people know what they're talking about and what they're doing, and giving their opinions. There's some charted things that they are mandatory to do. I don't remember off the top of my head all of them, but they have to have certain committees in each one. They have to have certain people. You have normally it's headed by a district leader, a district manager, and then you have a volunteer. So the district manager is a paid position. The other is like the chairperson, and all the committee members are voluntarily. So it's a hard thing to get into because how many people want to leave their job to go straight into a meeting. Sometimes you're going to have the partnership people. Some people are going to have, let's say, people that are just trying to get active in the community, etc. And it's a good stepping stone to get into politics, but also to know what's going on in your neighborhood,
Mm-hmm.
and try to make action too.
I agree wholeheartedly.
Now, I would love to see more young individuals join it, and I've been pushing that for as long as I can remember. I didn't go to my first community board until maybe my mid-20s. After I came back from the service and I was doing nonprofit work, I was like, well, what's the big deal about a community board? But that's where those activists are there too as well.
Mm-hmm.
So when was the first time you went?
Probably when I was running for city council when I was 21.
So up until that point, you never went. Did you know about it?
I didn't really know about the community board at all. Growing up, it's not something you really hear about. Even growing up, most I knew was my senators, my congresswoman, and who the president and vice president was. I didn't know about the city council. I didn't know about the state senate or even the state assembly. So, as time progressed, I kind of picked up on all these things.
One of the things that I've known about, but I've never invested any time, is the school districts.
Mm-hmm.
They have their own councils and own voting systems, and it's pretty detailed. Like I've tried to in the past go down and see how it works. It's a little too much for me. I'm heavily involved in politics, and I think that's a hard situation right there. But one thing I didn't know is that at those levels, they actually pick the parent coordinators and superintendents, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Or either they vote on it or they have some power to sway regarding it.
Right.
And that's a great, I didn't know that it went that far. I thought superintendents and and parent coordinators were just, you apply for the job and you get it.
Mm.
But no, it's not. And you got to think about one of the activities that I've been trying to do is engage with the youth. And I only found out that recently about those two positions being pushed towards those are in those fields. But a gatekeeper in that position holds a tremendous amount of power, getting, the community leaders into the youth. Now they're picking and choosing who they want. Mm-hmm. So now I can understand a little bit more on not why my mentorship programs and my youth programs maybe have been delayed in certain schools and stuff like that. When one of the things I try to promote is, let's say, military engagement. I'm a former United States Marine, so I always try to encourage individuals that the good parts and the bad parts, but also the very good parts about the military. And now I'm looking at that as well right now, and I'm saying, okay, now I can see why it's so difficult. I mean, military is a little more extreme, but once again, if you're trying to start let's say a photo program with the schools, you have to deal with the school and the vending, and then the process of that, and now you have to deal with the gatekeepers on top of that, mm-hmm. et cetera, et cetera. So I can see why the youth have been, if you ask them if they've been to a community board and they haven't, and I can see why that's not a common thing now, and I'm sure there's a tremendous other amount of things, but on this subject, I think it's pertinent.
I agree wholeheartedly. Now, you mentioned community education councils. Those elections are happening this year. Happens every 2 years, so on the odd-numbered years. And yes, they do have a lot of voting power, especially for the schools. And there's also like there's requirements to run for office. There's also requirements to run for these community education council seats. You have to have a child or be the guardian of a child that attends these schools. So you and I may not be eligible to run for that, but if you do know someone that may be interested in that, I believe an organization like Place NYC might have resources on how to run for such a thing.
Yeah, no. And the difficulty part, like they have to have one for a certain category, mm-hmm. and then they have it broken down by also school age. Mm-hmm. And I was like, wow, it's a little too much for me.
I know.
But once again, if you're involved in your children's lives, this is what brings up the other stuff that happens. Mm-hmm. So with that being said, Isaiah, would you let them know how they can reach you?
So you can reach me at my email, which is vegaluna for NY, all spelled out, at gmail.com. And yeah, send me an email if you'd like.
Well, thank you for joining. For those that would be interested in joining us here at Political Chit Chat, please feel free to reach out at Gonzalo Duran, NYC at gmail.com. And feel free, as always, to we'll get your information out to Isaiah. Until then, and as always, God bless America.